and welcome to Bethan's Kitchen and Garden. Today I'm in the garden and I'm going to be harvesting my broad beans and garlic. Now I'm going to push myself into this shed wars shenanigans that's going on YouTube, and I believe the idea is that you join a team and whatever you harvest, you contribute to the overall team amount that is grown that year, and you pass on your tips of growing as you go. So I'm going to start off by harvesting my broad beans, which are infested with blackfly at the top. Well, actually, they're not too bad. The ones I've grown at the front, which I overwintered, they're not too bad with blackfly. I now remember why I overwinter my broad beans, because they don't get so infected by blackfly. The ones I've grown in my neighbour's garden are really badly infected by it, and I'm going to have to rip them up because I don't think anything is going to come from them. They're just too bad. So but the ones in the front garden have produced, and I've had a couple of harvests off them already. But I'll harvest them now, and I'll show you what I've got once it's finished. So to harvest the broad beans, I'm just going to take the stems off at the base of the plant, and then harvest the beans off the stems, and I'll actually leave the plant in the ground for the roots to just rot down into the soil. Here is the rather pitiful harvest of broad beans. These are the worst. This is the worst harvest of broad beans I've ever had. And this is the plants all cut up. When I take the plants out of the ground, I always chop them up as small as I can, so that when I put them in the compost heap, they compost down as quick as they can. And I was wondering where it sort of like went wrong with the broad beans, really, why I've got such a small harvest. I've had the harvest you've just seen and one more harvest of it, and that's it. And normally my freezer is just chock-a-block with broad beans. So I was thinking back, and I think it all went wrong really when I planted them out back in the October time, I think it was. Normally I fleece them, and I thought I'd experiment with not fleecing them this year through the winter, and it was obviously a big mistake, because I must have planted about 12 broad beans and they all germinated and they were looking great, and then a load of them just rotted off or just sort of disappeared overnight, really. So I was left with those 6 plants you just saw, and then when the spring came, I didn't take the tops off, and that's why they've got such an infestation of blackfly, because if I had taken the tops off, then the blackfly wouldn't have been so bad, and what small broad beans that were left on the plant, I could have left them to mature a bit longer, so I wouldn't have harvested them today. But that didn't materialise either. So that is my shed wars tip, is to fleece the broad beans if you're growing them in the winter, and remember to take the tops off during the spring. But let me show you now what I'm going to put in place of the broad beans. This is where the broad beans were, and in their place I'm going to put 4 tomato plants. These are amateur tomato plants, the variety is amateur, and I believe they are a bush variety, so they don't need staking. But to me, they do look like they're growing as a cordon and not a bush. So we'll have to wait and see how these turn out. But I also forgot that when I lost my broad bean plants, I interplanted the broad bean plants that were still there with these onions, which are not ready to come out yet. So when I was planning what to put here after I took out the broad beans and realised I still had my onions growing, there was only really the tomatoes that I could put in. These are outdoors. I was going to grow them in my greenhouse, but these are an outdoor variety, so I'll pop them in there. And let's get on with doing that now. I've just prepped the ground by putting in some chicken manure pellets, and then in the planting hole I've put some bloodfish and bone, and I'm just going to pop the tomato plant in, and I'm going to push it down as far as I can because the stems will produce new roots, which is always good about tomato plants. If they're leggy, you can just plant them a bit deeper and they'll still be fine. So I'm going to put that in there, and then I'm just going to dig another hole here and pop the pot that it was growing at a sort of an angle, so that when I water into the pot and the water will go down and the roots of the tomato plant will grow down and establish themselves. So I shouldn't need to water as much because those roots will go deep. That is another hashtag Shedwars tip from me. So I'll just carry on and pot the other three up, and then I'll show you them when I'm done. Well, that's them all planted up. It does look a bit of a mess because the onions are sprawling everywhere, but I'm glad to get them in the ground. Hopefully they'll grow away and give me lots of tomatoes. I just need to water them in now, but before I do, I'll plant the fennel that I've got to plant in the place of where I had my meteor peas, because they've all gone over now for the year. And then I can water everything at the same time. So let's go and get that fennel in the ground. So I'm now going to plant out my fennel, and I'm going to plant it in where the old peas used to be. So I've got my fennel all set out in the stations that I want it to be in. So what I'm going to do is use the trusty old chicken manure pellets, which I'm just going to scatter around and work into the soil. And I've got my bloodfish and bone again to put in the planting pocket. And I'm just going to dig a hole and plant the plants. Let's see what I just work that into the soil, and then make a hole where I want my plant to go. Put some bloodfish and bone in there as well, just to give it some extra nutrients. If I had any mycorrhiza fungi, I'd use that as well, but I don't, so I'm not going to. And then I just cover that over. And I'll just crack on with planting the rest, and I'll show you what it's looking like when it's done. Well, that's the fennel all in now. Hopefully they'll grow quite well with their rejuvenated soil. And I have planted just to there. This patch here hasn't really worked out where I put in this L shape, because I didn't realise this big water tank was going to sit so far forward, so it's blocking out a lot of the light at the back. So I think what I'll end up doing is just putting a board down on top, which will give me access to be able to lean over and do the weeding that needs doing over there. But before I water everything in, I realised that I need to harvest my garlic, because my garlic is right next to where I've just planted those tomatoes. Well, some of it is. And I just want to pull that out before I water everything. So let me show you where I've got my garlic and where I'm going to be pulling it out. And then I'll show you the harvest when it's done. So here's the garlic. There's a bit of a potato plant flopped over at the moment, and the potatoes, my first earlies, they are probably ready for picking, but we still got some shop bought potatoes at the moment. So as soon as the shop bought potatoes are done, I'll do a potato reveal from there. Yes, so the garlic, I've got some here, and I've got a row of it in here. The first row here, this is all garlic, and I think maybe a couple in the second row too. And then I've got my tubs over here. And it'll be good to get these out of these tubs, because I can then use the tubs to plant some beans in. So I'll just pull, well, I'll give it a gentle pull and see if I need to no, so there we are. Sometimes you need to use a trowel, but the soil is very light, it's no dig, so it doesn't get compacted down, so things like leeks and alliums tend to come out quite easy. So I'll get on with pulling out the rest of the garlic, and I'll show you what I've got when I've done it. And here is the garlic harvest. This little clump here are from the pots, and these ones are from the beds. So if you just compare these four here, you can see the ones from the beds have grown a lot bigger than the ones from the pots. But where the cloves are smaller, grown in pots than in the beds, it doesn't really matter. I've got more harvest that have grown in pots than if I hadn't grown in pots. So that's all very good. And I'm very pleased to have got my tomatoes done. I'm just looking across at them now, and it's reminded me that I really must sow some basil to go near it, because basil grows really well near tomatoes, as do marigolds, and I've got some, not marigolds, but calendula, which are very similar, that I'm going to put in the bed with the tomatoes, so that they're meant to ward off the white fly, I think it is, that gets on the tomatoes. So I must try and remember to do that at some point today. But it's getting very hot now, and I'm going to go in for a cooling drink. So thank you very much for joining me today, and having a look around my front garden and watching me harvesting my broad beans. I'm absolutely covered in blackfly now. I'm sitting here and they're crawling all up my legs. Anyway, that's beside the point. Thanks for joining me today, and please tune in next time, and I'll catch you later. All I can say about that is lovely job.